Hello, my name is Andy Binker-Cosen from 21 Stocks. We're here today with Dr. Oliver Scott Goldsmith from the Institute of Social and Economic Research at the University of Alaska in Anchorage. He's an expert on the regional economics of Alaska, a very interesting state. It's very unique in everything from its climate to its very economy. Now, when we read about Alaska's economy over and over again, we see it characterized as a three-piece economy or a three-legged economy. What does this mean, Mr. Goldsmith?
What it means is that you can divide the economic drivers in the economy into three parts. The first is the federal dollars. We are supported by the federal government to a larger extent than any other state. We get more dollars per capita from the federal government flowing into the state than any other. And that includes both civilian spending and military spending. Secondly, what I would characterize our traditional natural resources, our fishing, our minerals, our timber, are an important driver. Those are the industries that date back to before Alaska became a state, the earlier part of last century, and they have continued to develop. But most recently, since Alaska became a state 50 years ago, petroleum has been the driver for the economy, and about half of all Alaskan jobs can be traced to petroleum. It's really had a transformative effect on our economy. At one time, Alaska was producing over 2 million barrels a day of oil. We're still producing about 600,000 barrels a day. And because the oil largely has been on state lands, the state has been able to collect a very significant amount of revenues, public revenues from that production. And that's been very important to our economic growth and development.
Now, in the long run, would you say that being an oil-rich state is going to be beneficial for Alaska, or will it suffer from the infamous resource curse like many other developing countries with natural resources?
Well, so far I would say that we have clearly benefited from petroleum. It's had a transformative effect on the economy. It has resulted in a much stronger economy, both in terms of public revenues and in terms of private sector business development. The private economy is much deeper and much stabler than it otherwise would have been. As I mentioned, our traditional natural resource industries, mining and particularly fishing, are very seasonal. And to a large extent because of our severe climate. We're warm in the summer but very cold in the winter. So that seasonal fluctuation in economic activity is a detriment to stable economic development. And the petroleum industry is a year-round industry. And the public revenues that it has generated have helped to create a year-round industry. And that's been good for private business. Not to mention all the private sector jobs generated by oil development. And then in the public sector, we've benefited from high public spending on infrastructure. We have good schools. We have relatively good roads. We have good social programs, and we have very low taxes both on individuals and on businesses. And in addition, we've been able to save a significant portion of our public revenues against the day in the future when petroleum production will have ended. We currently have about between $45 and $50 billion in various savings accounts.
Would Alaska be able to adapt if oil were replaced in the near future by, say, alternative energy resources? Could the other two legs of your economy hold you, or are there other industries which could provide enough public revenue and enough jobs?
Well, that's the $64 question as we move ahead into this new century. As I mentioned, petroleum production peaked at 2 million barrels a day, and we're now down to about 600,000 barrels a day. That production is from onshore, primarily state-owned land. And that area, although it's not played out, the easy-to-get oil has already been produced. As we look to the future, there are a number of possibilities to extend the life of the petroleum industry in the state. There's possibility of expanding into federal lands onshore. There's a possibility of extending exploration and development offshore off the Arctic coast. In both of those locations, there are estimated to be tens of billions of barrels of oil. Also onshore, we have what we characterize as viscous or heavy oil. It's oil that does not flow as easily as the light, sweet crude that we've already produced. That oil is not as valuable, and it's a little more difficult to get out of the ground, but there are tens of billions of barrels of reserves of that oil which have been identified. And so there are a number of possible ways in which we can extend the life of our petroleum industry into the future.
Has Alaska's natural resource jobs and its basic isolation in many ways from the rest of the U.S. and the world shielded from the recession, or has the recession been suffered greatly in the state?
We have probably been one of the most fortunate states in terms of weathering the current recession in the United States and in the rest of the world. And it's a combination of not having gotten ourselves in the situation of overexpansion of our housing sector on the one hand, and on the other hand, having economic dependence not only on oil and gas, but on other commodities as well. And as you know, world commodity prices have remained high, and combination of those two things, which have translated into strength in the mining industry, in particular in the oil and gas industry, and generated a lot of revenues for state government. The combination of those things have helped us to maintain employment levels throughout the recession. We had a slight dip in employment. 2009, 2010 started to come back, actually.
And with Alaska being 2.5 miles away from Russia, how has the state exploited trade with the Far East following the Cold War?
Russia is not one of our primary trading partners. We do have our eyes sort of looking to the Far East in terms of economic growth. Our main trading partners are Japan, Korea, to a lesser extent China now, and it's primarily in our natural resources, our fish and our coal and petroleum and timber. But we have not, other than a significant amount of cultural exchange, because the Native American Eskimo Eskimos and other Native Americans who live in northwestern Alaska are really cousins of many of the indigenous people who lived in that part of Russia. So there's been a lot of cultural exchanges. We have provided some technical assistance over the years, that is the university and the state, to help the Russian Far East develop, because they have many of the same challenges that we do. But there hasn't been much in terms of real economic ties.
Now, what do you think would have happened to Alaska, economically wise, if instead of the U.S. Purchasing the state from Russia, Canada would have purchased it, and Alaska nowadays would be the far east, the far west of Canada? Do you think the same economic policies would have been followed, and that the same growth would have been expected?
That's an interesting question. We like to sometimes compare ourselves with one of the Canadian provinces, Alberta, which is also very oil-rich and relatively wealthy and has a permanent fund, as Alaska does. We like to think that we've been a little smarter than they have in terms of developing a savings policy. We haven't been as intertwined, I would say, with the rest of the other U.S. states, as Alberta seems to need to be with the other provinces. That is, they're having to share their oil wealth with the other provinces in a way that we have not been required to do up to now. So I would say that we would still have developed our oil, but we would probably had to do more sharing with the rest of Canada than we currently do with the rest of the U.S.